It's official. We can now call Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen, the 45th President of the United States is Donald J. Trump. The man who had everything against him won the most important office in the land. In the end, it was America's choice and no one else's to make. When I found out who the president-elect was, I understood perfectly how good democracy felt. While I was not of age to vote in this election, I was just as emotionally involved as anyone who was and believes democracy works. You would think my father and I were watching a football game, how we were booing and cheering at the television, but no. We were watching national news election coverage. November 8th of 2016 was a very stress-filled and emotional night in my house. While the two main American ideologies clashed at the polls, I stayed in constant contact with my grandfather as we called off states together over the phone. I was almost sad to see this election end. It was just as thrilling as it was interesting and informative to me. The reason I was so emotional about our election is because our nation gives us something special. It gives us the right to choose who will lead our nation. This is the right to vote, and this tool is the most powerful at a democracy's disposal. There are over 142 million registered voters in the United States, and just over half of these people voted in the 2016 presidential election. It was these citizens that played the most crucial role in deciding our next president. The right to vote, however, is not as clear-cut as it may seem. Article 2, Section 1 of our Constitution states that in presidential elections, each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. And it goes on to say that this number of electors is equal to the number of senators and representatives from each state. So, to win the White House, presidential candidates need 270 out of 538 of these available electoral votes. So what does that mean? Does this really mean our presidential election is decided by a mere 538 electors? Well, yes, but these electors usually follow the will of the people they represent. Very few times in history have these electors voted for someone other than the people they represent. These electors are called faithless or unfaithful. The 2016 presidential election has seen the most faithless electors in over a century. President Trump had 2, and Secretary Clinton had 5. The Electoral College has caused quite a controversy over the years. It has stopped us from hearing such names as President Tilden, President Cleveland, and more recently, President Gore and President Hillary Clinton. In 7% of American elections, the popular vote is for a different candidate than the electoral vote. The reason our elections are set up this way is to assure that larger states, such as California and New York, do not decide every presidential election. They assure that even sparsely populated states, such as Wyoming and Montana, get a voice and are important to presidential candidates. California alone has nearly 40 million residents compared to Wyoming's mere 560,000. Our forefathers set up the election this way and based the number of electors off senators and representatives, not by population. This assures that each state has at least 3 electors, 2 for their senators and 1 for their representative. The Electoral College was not an easy decision for our forefathers to make. They balanced between giving states' rights and giving the individual citizen rights. They also wanted to avoid something known as the tyranny of the majority. This is the fear that one huge group of citizens would decide every presidential election. How would smaller groups ever get a voice? While the Electoral College is not perfect by any means, it is meant to minimize its effect as much as it can. Just as voting rights evolve with the maturing of our nation, so did the Electoral College. Before the ratification of the 12th Amendment, the candidate who won, obviously, became president. The odd part about this system was, however, the candidate who lost and was in second place became vice president. This made things especially difficult for presidents such as John Adams, a Federalist, who had to work alongside his vice president, Thomas Jefferson, who was a Democratic Republican. After the ratification of the 12th Amendment, the winning candidate's running mate then became vice president. This has been the way our elections have been conducted since this amendment's ratification in 1804. Another plus of this amendment is that presidents and vice presidents work better together due to them being from the same party and running on the same ticket instead of being bitter opponents up until election night. The voting process itself also changed as our nation grew in age. Voting was not a privilege originally given to all citizens of this nation. At the time of the Constitution's ratification, only white male landowners ages 21 and older could vote. Then, in 1870, black men gained their right to vote at ages 21 and older. Next, it was the ladies' turn. They gained their right to vote at ages 21 and older in 1920. The final piece to the puzzle was added in 1971 when the 26th Amendment was ratified, which allowed all citizens of this great nation the right to vote at the age of 18. While these different amendments halted regulations on voting, there isn't actually a specific amendment in our Constitution which states voting is a right for all people. This has just become an implied power of our Constitution, and this has led to controversy on such issues as early voting, voter registration, and the use of voter identification. Funny enough, these only seem to be issues for the side they will aid when the election is all said and done. These separate controversies have been especially talked about since President Bush took office in 2001, even though Al Gore won the popular vote by about 500,000 votes. To become a naturalized U.S. citizen, one of the questions that had to be answered correctly used to be, what is the most important right granted to U.S. citizens? Now, there could be dozens upon dozens of answers given to this question, but the answer the government looked for was the right to vote. The last thing our founders wanted was to once again live in fear of a tyrannical regime they had no control over or say in. They assured this would never happen again by giving citizens the tools to create their government. After all, government is meant to serve the people. The great President Ronald Reagan worded it best by saying, "We the people tell the government what to do, not the other way around." Also, to avoid further tyranny, our founding fathers created this electoral college. This created a pyramid of sorts. Citizens' votes would be entrusted to electors who would then cast their vote representing the will of the people. The final step, other than the inauguration of our president, was the verifying of these electoral votes by Congress. This great democratic process then came full circle. It started with the people who made a government, funneled through electors entrusted by the people, and finished in that very same government created by the people and for the people. The future is bright, ladies and gentlemen, because we have the right to choose our own path. If we do not like or approve of something in our government, we have the tools necessary to make change. We choose our lawmakers, our senators, our representatives, but most importantly, our next president by simply casting a ballot. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt once said, "Nobody will deprive the American people of the right to vote except the American people themselves." And the only way they could do this was by not voting. Our Constitution was created by the people of this nation, for the people of this nation, to represent and protect our freedoms. This contest is the idea of the Electoral College in its simplest form. A few judges representing the will of the audience they sit with. Judges, it is now time for you to vote.